It's Christmas time! Or maybe just holiday time if you're not into Christmas, which is totally fine. Or, I mean, if you're not into that either, maybe just happy, antiquated solstice celebration time that we still observe culturally for some reason, despite long having moved past our mostly agrarian roots. You know the one. But regardless of your cultural beliefs, it is, of course, that time of year that Space Wolf BadSanta comes to all the little good space marines of the Imperium and gives them presents like shiny new bolters or frag grenades. To everyone who has adhered acceptably to the Codex Astartes.
The Codex Astartes does not support this action.
Everyone else gets rocks filled with orcs. So in celebration, I figured that we'd talk about the naughtiest and nicest factions in Warhammer 40k. What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're going to be talking about the naughtiest and nicest factions in 40k, and deciding which ones should get shiny new grenades and thunderhammers and things like that, and which ones should be blown out an airlock for being utterly degenerate. Before we get into the video, just a quick reminder to drop a like and a subscribe, you know, all that YouTube stuff, you know the drill. You've heard it a billion times before. It really helps the channel though, and it really helps tell me what kind of content is fun, so if you like this style of video, let me know. Before we get into the video, I also want to mention I've extended our 10k subscriber / holiday end of year extravaganza giveaway, where I'm giving away a Tyrannid Battle Force, one of the new ones, to a lucky viewer. I'll put a link down in the description on how you come in. There's a bunch of different ways to enter, and I'll be pulling that sometime after Christmas wraps up, so get on that real quick. But with that out of the way, and before we get into the meat of this video, let's talk about how we decide that a faction is naughty or nice. So, little known fact about 40k, but just like in real life, there are these things that some people decide to abide by, and those are called rules. And similar to real life, where whatever doesn't abide by those rules is generally labeled as naughty and thrown in prison, the factions in 40k that decide not to read the core rulebook are bad apples. So we're going to rate these factions by their level of adherence to the rulebook. So naughty factions wouldn't have as many things that say you can do a thing despite not normally being able to do the thing. Like, you can charge after you advance despite the fact that you advanced and normally can't charge. You can shoot at that thing even though you can't see it and normally you have to see the thing. You can do a thing in a different phase despite that thing not normally being allowed in that phase. You know, that kind of stuff. The nice factions generally won't ignore the rules in the core rulebook and basically just play a straight up normal game of 40k. Nice factions will also have the presence of mind and selflessness to abide by their dice rolls, so factions that have the audacity to ignore some facings of the dice or just sometimes ignore dices entirely, they're going to be on the naughty side and they get given a big lump of Belisarius Caul. So with that in mind, let's get started, and let's talk about the nicest factions in 40k first. Put all those bad apples in the back like they deserve. We're going to be doing the top 3 nicest factions and some honorable mentions as well, and number 3 on the list is Adeptus Custodes. Custodes mostly just rely on their statistical superiority in the fight phase to beat you out, and they don't have a lot of stuff that ignores rules. There are a couple of things in there. They can break the normal deep strike rules, which, I mean, technically, they're not really a core rule book, but, like, let's be real. Everybody generally agrees that you have to set up outside 9 inches of people when you deep strike, and Custodes are like, nope, not for me. I'm going to set up way closer. Custodes also have more objective secured models than other factions, given that everybody is objective secured in that faction for the most part. And they do like have a little bit of transhuman physiology there, some ignore AP stratagems, which would normally set them on the naughty list. But the fact that they don't have any indirect fire shooting, they cannot normally advance and charge, and they have to work really hard to do everything besides slowly move up the table and eventually punch you right in the face with their big swords, means that they belong on the nice list. Next up in the number 2 spot, we have Adeptus Mechanicus. The Toaster Boys do have a little bit of indirect fire in their lineup, but mostly they just break rules with their cavalry, especially Cerberus Raiders, who can do all sorts of stuff while they're engaged. They can move before the game and lock you in your deployment zone. It's very annoying. The rest of the faction, however, it just kind of stands there and it shoots at you, and eventually you die. They have a lot of cool combos that work with that to make their shooting better, but none of it really, like, breaks any of the rules. I guess situationally they can fall back and still shoot with their vehicles. Like that's pretty good, but I don't know if that's enough to put them on the naughty list. They also have a lot of snipers, so that ignores lookout, sir, so that's not very nice of them. But the vast majority of the time, they're just following the normal shooting rules to shoot you with normal guns that that'll eventually kill you because basically no one can withstand the unyielding fusillade of just normal firepower coming out of those normal guns. Now, before we get to the #1 nicest faction in Warhammer 40k, let's talk about some honorable mentions. I put Space Marines on here. Space Marines, like, I mean, it depends on what chapter you're playing. They do have some stuff that breaks the rules, and they do have a lot of indirect fire across the entirety of the faction, but generally they don't really take it. Outside of like Sakaran Arcuses, which I think are seeing some play now, they're mostly just gonna shoot you with a bolt gun, maybe stab you with a little knife, maybe a little relic sword, maybe a lightning claw. But if you play one of the more straightforward chapters like Imperial Fists, I think is a good example. They just play a normal game of 40k. Sometimes they ignore cover, so that's cool. But otherwise, there's not much going on. That said, a lot of those chapters, they play the bad boy, and they ignore a lot of stuff. So the faction doesn't get put on the nice list, but they are a good honorable mention. Drukhari, I think, are an interesting one, too. They don't really do much special. Like all the other Eldari sub-factions, they can move after they shoot, so that's kind of rule-breaking, and sometimes they can advance in charge and get some benefits from their combat drugs. And they can also stop you from falling back, which is pretty rude, and that is almost enough to put them on the naughty list. In addition to their satanic, punk rock, spiky aesthetic, that's enough to put anybody on the bad side of BadSanta. But otherwise, they're mostly relying on some invulnerable saves and stuff like that to make their way up the table. Their shooting is very generic, and they mostly just shoot guns at you. But it's that Eldari blood that gives them just enough rule breaking to not put them on the nice list. Chaos Demons also deserve a little bit of a shout out here, although I think Slaanesh being just the worst basically stops them from ever being able to be put on the nice list with all of that sin that they're doing over there in the warp. They have a lot of advance in charge in that sub-faction. They can bring models back a lot of times, which is kind of gross. They can also change your stats. That's not okay. You can't go ahead and edit other people's stats. But if you're playing like Khorne or Tzeentch, they're mostly just playing a straight-up game of 40k. They do a lot of deep striking. That's kind of gross. But other than that, not much else going on. Again, it's that demonic influence, though. You're never going to get a visit from BadSanta with a nice new shiny bolt gun if you look like a demon. Wrapping up the nice list, what's nicer than already being dead when your opponent gets to the table? Like, they don't have to do anything. The battle was already over millions of years ago, so there's not even any need for a conflict, and that's why the nicest faction in the 41st millennium is the Necrons. Despite looking pretty scary and being an entire army full of skeleton men carrying soul-ripping death lasers, Necrons are actually pretty fair and honorable when it comes to fighting their opponent. Essentially, the only thing that they do that really breaks any rules is just put themselves back on the table after you've killed them. But I think that is because they are so generous to their opponent that they just want to give them the opportunity to kill them again, you know, for fun. And that being said, I mean, is there really a rule that says you can't just put your models back on the table in 40k once they're destroyed? I don't know if that's in the rulebook. Do you? Can you point that out to me? Please put it in the comments if that's a rule that exists, because I don't know if I've read it. Necrons may just be the most fair. They also have a couple things that like go through terrain and stuff, but other than that, I mean, mostly they just stand there and they shoot you, and whoever wins the game of shooting each other wins also the game of 40k. What is fairer and nicer than that? So it feels good to have the faction rounding out the nice list being an untouchable paragon of virtue. Alright, so with the nice list out of the way, those boring goody two-shoes, get them out of the air and move over to the naughty list. This is a much more exciting part of town where there are no rules, and even if there were, we would just break them. Number 3 on the naughty list is a faction that's trying to persuade you that they're really the good guys, but they're not. Deep under their shiny metallic exterior, they're really evil-hearted, and those are Grey Knights. Grey Knights do a bunch of stuff in phases that you are not normally supposed to do that stuff. In the Psychic phase, they can both move, teleport, and shoot. That's not okay. You can't be doing that. Those are things for other phases. Get them out of the Psychic phase, Grey Knights. They can also shoot things that they can't see, but not just with some weapons, with any of their weapons. All of their weapons can shoot through walls sometimes, maybe. That's disgusting. Number 2 on the naughty list, another faction that would try to deceive you into thinking that they're very honorable, noble, and just. One of the core concepts of Warhammer 40k is rolling dice. And you know what faction doesn't have to roll dice? It's the Sisters of Battle. They break the core rule of the game where you gotta roll stuff to do stuff. They don't even do that. They're just like, I don't believe that I failed that save. I'm gonna pass it. That's not okay. You can't be doing that, Adeptus Sororitas. They also got some other stuff going for them. They can advance and charge. Just rude. And if you've ever seen a Sisters Repentia unit hit anything with those big old chain swords, you'll know this is very much a naughty faction. Now, before we get to the top of the naughty list, we'll talk about some honorable mentions. Just like I think Space Marines deserved a spot in the nice list, at least for the boring milquetoast Space Marine chapters that don't do anything besides stand around and shoot you and maybe punch you and slash you with a sword. There are a lot of Space Marines who want to throw out the rule book. Factions like Dark Angels that are highly chaotic from the get-go. They got that inner circle rule on a bunch of stuff. They can double move things. They can break the deep strike rules. They do all sorts of gross things that no one should be able to do. Disgusting, filthy Space Marines. Craft World Eldari, I mean, they ignore cover a lot of times. Can't be doing that. That's a rule in the game. You can't just ignore cover. What are you doing? They also move in the psychic phase just like Grey Knights. Stop it, Eldari. They got a lot of guns that can shoot stuff even though they can't see it. Gross. I think my favorite honorable mention, one that I would have put at third place, but I mean, this channel's got a pretty heavy bias towards these guys, but it's Tyranids. Tyranids don't even believe there is a rule book. They move like in every phase, a billion times. You're only supposed to move in the movement phase and then sometimes in the charge phase. But nah, Tyranids are like,
we're just gonna move and advance every phase. And you know what? We're gonna charge after it.
Filthy bugs. Get them out of my house. I'm calling an exterminator. They also got real good guns that shoot despite the fact that they don't have line of sight. They got a psychic power that it lets you advance and charge. I already mentioned that, but it's worth a second mention. And also, they're just gross insects. But with that, let's move to the naughtiest faction in Warhammer 40k. And I don't think that anybody's going to be surprised by this pick. It's a faction that has engendered endless complaining from the internet since its inception. That is the Harlequins. They have such little regard for the rules that they literally just laugh at it. That's their whole shtick. These Harlequins, they can advance and charge. They can fall back and charge. Sometimes they can advance and shoot without penalty. You're supposed to have a penalty even when you shoot your assault weapons, but they're just like, nah, fuck you. They can even move in the psychic phase. Why is everybody able to move in the psychic phase? The psychic phase is for psychicking, not for moving. Sometimes they shoot a vehicle, they don't even have to roll damage on it. You just take the damage. You gotta make the wound roll, Harlequins. Sometimes they even move during your turn. When you're like, I'm gonna move these guys, and they're like, you know what, idiot? It's time for a Twilight Encore. It's just my turn, it's not your turn. What is happening? They can embark into transports after they move, even in the fight phase? How? How is that even possible? It's just an endless waterfall of rules infractions, and there's no way to stop it. It just keeps happening. Let's be real here. It's probably no wonder that two of the best factions of the game are two of them that break the rules the most. And while we're talking about it, a lot of those Space Marine factions we talked about, real good too. So pro tip of the day, if you want to win games at 40k, just be naughty and ignore the rules. When your opponent says, you can't shoot me, your guy can't see my guy, just say, look them directly in the eyes and tell them that you have no regard for the rules of Warhammer 40,000 and they're gonna have to deal with it. So anyway, those are the factions who are either gonna get a nice shiny new toy for this holiday season or are gonna get nothing and they'll like it for being gross and naughty. Although those factions, instead of being rewarded with nice gifts, will just be given a bunch of tournament wins. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. A little bit of a silly video for the holiday season. So let me know if you liked it. I'd really appreciate it. As always, big thanks to my patrons over at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. I love those people. They're awesome. And remember to keep it classy, folks. Have a happy holiday.